Britain is facing one of the most dramatic and chaotic moments in its political history as the nation watches a constitutional crisis unfold with a level of intensity and public emotion not seen in decades, sparked by the unprecedented downfall of Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who only months ago was being celebrated as the leader who would restore integrity to British politics but is now at the centre of a scandal so enormous that it has shaken every pillar of government, from the courts to Parliament to the monarchy itself, beginning quietly with rumours and whispers around Westminster and erupting into a national firestorm once the UK Supreme Court delivered a stunning ruling that accused the sitting Prime Minister of violating the rule of law, misleading the public, hiding financial misconduct, and compromising the very standards he once claimed to champion. What began as a few questions about undeclared assets and irregularities in government financial disclosures grew into a massive investigation that eventually uncovered what judges described as systemic deception, leading to a televised judgment watched by millions across the country, where the court declared in stark, uncompromising terms that no individual, including the Prime Minister, could place themselves above the law. The moment the ruling was announced, the reaction outside Westminster exploded, with thousands of citizens rushing to Parliament Square, shouting, waving signs, and calling for the immediate resignation of the disgraced leader. Within hours, London was transformed into a city filled with anger, confusion, and adrenaline as protesters surged into the streets and riot police struggled to maintain control, setting up barriers to prevent clashes as emotions soared. Inside Downing Street, however, the atmosphere was even more volatile, as Keir Starmer reportedly refused to step down despite the Supreme Court's ruling and despite pressure from senior figures in his own party who feared the consequences of defying the legal system. Starmer's refusal to leave triggered a crisis that escalated faster than anyone anticipated, turning a political scandal into a constitutional emergency that forced every pervasive institution of British government to take a position. Cabinet members were torn, with some urging him to resign gracefully while others insisted that he stay and fight, claiming he was the victim of a politically motivated attack. Meanwhile, the country watched in disbelief as the Prime Minister locked himself inside, insisting that he still held the people's mandate even as crowds outside demanded accountability. Social media platforms erupted with millions of comments within hours, making the scandal a global conversation as hashtags calling for his removal spread worldwide. Reports and leaks appearing across television networks and major newspapers revealed a shocking series of hidden financial dealings, including millions of pounds transferred through offshore accounts, undisclosed gifts, luxury trips, and suspicious political donations. The initial discovery of a £124,000 financial discrepancy quickly ballooned into a sprawling network of questionable transactions that connected the Prime Minister to wealthy donors, corporate lobbyists, and private entities that had allegedly benefited from government policies. Whistleblowers emerged from within Starmer's own administration, providing testimony that painted a disturbing picture of how dissent was suppressed, how officials who asked questions were removed, and how secrecy became the standard operating method inside the government. The Labour Party, once revived under Starmer's leadership, found itself in turmoil as internal divisions widened, with some MPs demanding total transparency and others scrambling to distance themselves from the mounting evidence of corruption. Amid the chaos, Britain's global allies expressed growing concern about the stability of the UK government. Foreign leaders sought clarification, financial markets reacted sharply, and the pound briefly fell as investors worried about the long-term implications of the crisis. But the most extraordinary twist came from Buckingham Palace, which had remained silent initially but eventually intervened after the situation escalated beyond political control. King Charles, having monitored the unfolding events remotely from Balmoral, made the sudden decision to return to London, signaling that the monarchy was preparing to play a direct constitutional role. A series of emergency meetings were held inside the palace with legal advisors, constitutional scholars, and senior ministers, discussing the unprecedented question of whether the king should dismiss a sitting prime minister. When Starmer continued to defy both public pressure and legal authority, the king issued a sealed royal letter to Downing Street that effectively gave the prime minister one final chance to resign. Witnesses inside, No. 10 described scenes of chaos and shouting as Starmer read the letter and refused to comply, tearing it open in anger and accusing the monarchy of overstepping its bounds. His advisors were split again. Some pleaded with him to step down to preserve whatever dignity he had left, while others encouraged him to claim he was the victim of a coup. In the end, Starmer chose confrontation, forcing the monarchy to take unprecedented action. In an extraordinary live broadcast watched by millions around the world, King Charles announced that the Prime Minister had failed to uphold the rule of law and that, as sovereign, he was compelled to dismiss him immediately. The moment the announcement was made, crowds outside Westminster erupted in cheers, tears, and celebrations, as many felt that the country had been pulled back from the brink of total constitutional collapse. Starmer was escorted out of Downing Street by security officials, pale and silent, stripped of authority and facing an uncertain future. The moment he left office, Scotland Yard confirmed that formal criminal investigations were already underway, including allegations of bribery, abuse of power, misappropriation of public funds, and potential money laundering. Investigators seized documents, raided properties, questioned key associates, and traced offshore accounts. Evidence mounted rapidly as forensic accountants uncovered more transactions. Whistleblowers provided detailed testimonies, and internal communications emerged showing that concerns about misconduct had been raised but ignored. International observers watched closely as British institutions scrambled to stabilize the crisis. Global news outlets broadcast continuous coverage. International markets wavered before gradually recovering, and diplomatic channels were flooded with questions about the future of British governance. Parliament formed a caretaker administration to manage the government until new elections could be held, while MPs from across the political spectrum apologized for failing to detect the warning signs earlier. Across the country, public anger evolved into determination as citizens demanded deep reforms to ensure such a collapse could never happen again. Town halls held emergency meetings, grassroots movements emerged almost overnight, and analysts predicted a massive political realignment in the upcoming election. Britain's political landscape, already fragmented by years of tension, was now facing a reckoning that could reshape the future of governance. Yet despite the scale of the crisis, the institutions of the state ultimately held firm, demonstrating resilience in the face of unprecedented turmoil. The judiciary stood its ground. The monarchy acted within constitutional limits. Civil service procedures functioned under immense strain, and the public's refusal to accept corruption underscored the strength of democratic accountability. For Keir Starmer, the fall was swift and devastating. Once considered a symbol of integrity, he became a warning about the dangers of unchecked power and political complacency. Prosecutors suggested that indictments could follow soon, meaning that legal consequences might be inevitable. As Britain slowly regained its footing, one message became clear: no leader, no matter how popular or powerful, can stand above the principles of justice, transparency, and accountability that form the foundation of the nation.